Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Arend, and I'm a senior analyst at the Global Blockchain Business Council. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Global Blockchain Business Council, or GBBC, and Global Digital Finance's Global Leaders Series. This is a weekly global town hall with policymakers and business leaders to hear their insights into their work, the state of blockchain and the digital asset industry, and their read on current global affairs. Today, we have the pleasure to be joined by President Toomas Hendrik Ilves, former President of Estonia and GBBC Regional Ambassador to Estonia, and our host, Sandra, GBBC's CEO and GDF Board Director, for a conversation and live audience Q&A on how Estonia built one of the world's leading digital societies, lessons learned, and how governments can utilize tech to improve the lives of citizens. Before we begin, I'd briefly like to provide some background on President Ilves. From 1993 to 96, Elvis served in Washington as the ambassador of the Republic of Estonia to the United States and Canada. During this time, he launched the Tiger Leap initiative to computerize and connect all Estonian schools online. He then served as Minister of Foreign Affairs and as a member of the Estonian Parliament and later the European Parliament. Elvis was elected President of the Republic of Estonia in 2006 and was re-elected for a second term in 2011. During his presidency, he was appointed and served in several high-level positions in the field of ICT in the European Union. He served as chairman of the EU Task Force on e-health and was chairman of the European Cloud Partnerships Steering Board at the invitation of the European Commission. Following his presidency, President Ilves joined Stanford University as a distinguished visiting fellow. We welcome your questions at any point during today's webinar. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we kindly ask that you submit them at any point during the conversation. Without further ado, I'd like to hand things off to Sandra. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. And welcome to President Ilves. And thank you for making the time to chat with us for the next hour. Just want to really, address our global audience by getting to know you a bit better. Could you talk a little bit about your background and your journey to the presidency of Estonia? I know we've gotten a bit of your bio, but why don't we start with a bit of your background?
Well, I was born in Sweden. My parents were refugees from communism and Nazis. They escaped in this brief three-week period when you could actually get out of Estonia. And then when I was 3, they moved to the US, and I grew up in New Jersey. Whence my accent, more or less. Formative, I suppose, is that in 1969, 1970, I had a math teacher who was doing her PhD in math education at Columbia, and she did a one-off experiment that was never repeated, or at least not for about 40 years, which was she taught us how to program computers. And so I was 15, and we learned BASIC. We had a teletype machine with a perfo tape and a telephone modem hooked up to a mainframe 30 miles away, and I learned to code. That was, which I just thought was kind of fun and no big deal. But later on, when I went to college, I was at Columbia, and there was an ad there for looking for someone to program. It was and I programmed a PDP-8, which is it's about a yard wide and about half a yard deep and about 18 inches high, and it's called the PDP-8 because its maximum of memory capacity was 8 kilobytes, which is an empty email these days. But anyway, and there I coded in assembler, hexadecimal language. I mean, none of it was very difficult. But anyway, the point is that became formative for me many, many years later. So anyway, then I skip over a bunch of years, but when Estonia was independent, I was living in Germany, and I was asked by the first democratically elected president to become ambassador to the United States, which I did. And during that time, of course, Estonia had become independent again, but it was in terrible shape. And measure of that is that in 1938, the last full year before World War II, Estonia and Finland basically were at the same level of development, the same level of income, I mean, GDP per capita was identical for all intents and purposes.
Right.
In 1992, which was the first year of full independence after Soviet and Nazi occupations, the GDP per capita of Finland was 24,000 US dollars, and the GDP per capita of Estonia was 2,800. So basically an eightfold difference, which shows what had happened thanks to communist occupation. And so all these people had these ideas on what to do, and I was one of the people who people asked, what should we do? And I was thinking, and then something else happened in '93, which was that Mosaic came out. And Mosaic was the first ever web browser. You had to buy it. $29.95 at Radio Shack. I mean, concepts that make no sense these days. And you had to upload it into your computer with floppy disk. But I did this, and I looked at this. I said, "Wow, this is going to be the future." And this is one area where it doesn't matter if we're way behind in everything else. I mean, okay, the U.S., Europe, everyone's been building highways for 50 years, and everything is new and everything's in great shape. But when it came to digitization, we're all sort of at the starting line. And that's when I proposed to computerize the schools and connect them all up, and which met with all kinds of opposition. But fortunately, I had allies in the government, and we started this program. So by 1998, all schools were online with computer labs in this country. And then it became clear soon enough that actually digitization was a great thing, but we have to do it seriously. And that was when we decided on the fundamentals of digitization of a country that we have to today. And that involves a very secure digital identity, mandatory for everyone. You don't have to use it, but you have to have a digital ID. And just a chip card, some of these things. There I am.
There you
got
are.
A chip on
Excellent.
the back. And so, I mean, with key components such as end-to-end encryption, two-factor authentication, public key infrastructure. And then the second major component is the architecture. We developed our own, a distributed layer of which connects everything up. And so since 2001, we have basically digitized all public and government services. So there are actually only 3 government services or public service that you cannot do online. The first is getting married. You have to show up. Second is getting divorced. You both have to show up, not as pleasant. And the third, which is is transfer of property, because we don't allow anonymous shell companies in this country. And if you look at the damage those things have done elsewhere in terms of money laundering, we don't want any of that. So that's basically what we did. And of course now, we've been doing it for a long, long time. And we calculate in terms of saved time, or based on saved time, that we save about 2% of GDP a year, based on both government workers as well as time spent by citizens. Both the demand and supply side are much cheaper, or take up much less time, so that you can get things done easily. And the benefits of this, of course, have all really come out during COVID, right? Because nothing stops. I read a week ago that there's a huge backlog of 1.2 million passport requests in the US because you can't get a passport. It's inconceivable to me.
you're leading us right into the next topic, well transitioned. I wanted to ask you, with Estonia having been on the digitization journey as long as it has, and looking at COVID and obviously the other issues that are going on in the US, it would be great if you could share with us some of your thoughts on where should the US start? Not on the road to digitization. I mean, there are things in the US that are digitized, but let's just focus on the government for right now. The US government is complex.
Well, first of all, I say that it was, for 3.5 years, I was at Stanford, I lived in Palo Alto. And in a 12-mile radius, I had the headquarters of Tesla, Google, Apple, Facebook, Palantir, VMware was like right around the corner from me, YouTube. And so this is the world center for digital innovation. If I want to if I want to get a driver's license, I have to go stand in line for hours and hours. If I when I wanted to register my daughter to go to school, I had to take a photocopy of my electricity bill to the school headquarters and a passport and sit there for half an hour as she writes everything out. So, I mean, the US is highly digitized when it comes to the private sector, but in terms of public services, there isn't really much of a change since the 1950s, frankly, and unfortunately. Well, but part of this is, I mean, there are many reasons for this, but I think since the key to successful digitization is to have a secure identity. That's the first key, but anyway, a secure identity, which with legal efficacy, meaning we have a digital signature law, so you can do everything with it. Sign checks. I mean, you don't have checks, but you can sign anything. You can make all your transactions. And unless you have a secure identity that the government trusts, then it's not going to happen. And therefore, we're a long way off. The other thing that also has to be done, I mentioned earlier that our IDs are mandatory, and that is also key because we find Europe, for 3 years now, every country in the European Union has to issue a digital identity if people want. Where it is voluntary, you have an uptake rate of 15 to 25%, the early adopters or the techies. But if the uptake rate is so low, then if you're in the government or if you're in the private sector, because our private sector makes use of the same system, it's much more secure.
Right.
Companies and governments don't invest in it. They go, why should I do it? I mean, 85% of the population still doesn't have a digital ID. Why should I put the money in to digitize government or public services? So that's where the political will problem comes in the United States, which is, first of all, no one has the courage to say, here is a digital identity, and B, that you have to take one. So you're already blocked from the get-go, because without a digital identity, it's not going to happen. But unless it's widespread, you're not going to have the services. So it's kind of a catch-22.
Yeah.
But since this is the GBBC, I should also mention on Estonia in that 2008, by 2007, we realized that we had digitized just about everything, including all our laws exist only on the web. We don't print out what in the UK is a Hansard or big fat books of laws passed. And same thing is true of court cases. And we realized that, wow, we could be in real trouble if someone changes this, at which point, this is an issue of data integrity.
Okay.
And so everything since September of 2008, all critical data is on blockchain. It's a permission blockchain, so it's not, you don't have the whole world in on it, as with with coins or anything, but I mean, but there are certain authorities who have to sign off. So medical records, property records, laws, I mean, critical data is all on blockchain now for 12 years. I don't know if other countries do that. Not much, probably, but anyway, we've done that, and it's been quite it's reassuring, because I mean, imagine if someone goes and changes a law, right? I mean, you go say,
Yeah.
he did something illegal. No, I didn't. And then you go and look in your computer and say, well, he didn't do anything illegal. Or even we have a court case. It's decided one way, but in fact, someone goes, hacks it, and makes the court case go another way. The record is strictly digital. So you need to have data integrity. And my point has been for years that, in fact, while everyone is worried about privacy, not justifiably, but when it comes to data, key data, much bigger issue, personal data, much bigger issue is data integrity. I mean, but if someone publishes my blood type, or someone sort of publishes my bank account, yeah, okay, maybe not so nice, but okay. If someone changes my blood type, it could be lethal.
Right.
If someone changes my bank account, I would just be even more broke than I am today.
Yeah.
So data integrity really is the issue. And this is where I see blockchain in its various forms critical. Again, I think that permission blockchain, keyless signature is far more important from a security point of view. You can make money, lose money with Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever. But when it comes to crucial data, as we digitize more and more, we must put those data on blockchain.
Really appreciate the fact that Estonia has led the efforts, and frankly, been the earliest adopting country that I think we know of in terms of integrating all of its processes into verifiable, actionable systems on whether it's blockchain or other technologies. So I think more countries need to kind of look at Estonia as a bright example of how a government can function fully or nearly fully digitized. What lessons would you give to not a superpower like the US or China or Russia? What would you give to a country that maybe doesn't have a lot of resources, that struggles with their budget on just a survival basis, let alone thinking about digitization? How should legislators, leaders, and even entrepreneurs think about how they might take advantage of this? Because you made an interesting point about digitization being something that can be taken up by governments around the world, even if they don't have a lot of,
I mean, to say we were a poor country when we started. We are no longer a poor country. We're doing rather well. But the point is, when we started this, we were poor, and tech costs much more because Moore's law. I mean, things were just much more expensive, but we bit the bullet and invested in this because we thought that was the future and banked on that, and that's it turned out rather well. I think that today the faster you digitize, the better. And it's cheaper. Everything costs so much less than it did. And the technology has been upgraded. I mean, we upgrade ours as well. I mean, you don't even have to be stuck with, I mean, you don't need to do what we do. You have to have the same legal principles as we do, because you have to have a secure identity that cannot be broken. And you need some form of distributed data exchange in a way that everybody doesn't see everyone. And that's actually the hard part. The hardest part of doing all this that took so long was figuring out who could see what.
Right.
So, I mean, the police can see that they can look at my traffic record. They can't see my healthcare records. The more dicey or specific things like the ministry in charge of workmen's compensation. I mean, it's not a home ministry. It's like the health ministry, right? I mean,
Right.
and you get health. I mean, you injure yourself on the job, you get insurance, just like in the U.S. workmen's compensation. Now they can look at my healthcare record, that part, only that part, that describes the injury I got on the job. They can't see anything else. They can't see my blood type, right? That stuff.
Right.
They can see on my, but they can see the particulars of what the doctor said about my injury if I'm injured on the job. And those are, I mean, working all of that out, who can see what is I mean, it takes a while, that's all. And of course, that depends on your legal system, what is permitted in your country, and that also depends on your on the culture that you live in. For example, in my country, all property records are public. Anyone can see what I own. I'm advising the Greek government on this. I mean, on digitization right now. And they're doing a great job, by the way. They're really moving fast. But anyway, but I said, yeah, well, property records are public. They said, really? Public? So, I mean, there are differences in sort of the cultural attitudes of what's acceptable in one country or another.
Right.
But that does lead me to one thing that is, when at least it's a privacy issue, when people say, oh, aren't you worried about Big Brother? And we've built the system, which, I mean, the system I would say is mutually reciprocal. What that means, to explain it, is that when I was in office, sort of newspapers, once a month, they would go check to see, has he bought anything? I mean, they did this they do this to all politicians, right?
Right.
Does he own,
right.
He bought himself something. And that's great because we're into transparency in this country. That doesn't bother. But it's mutually reciprocal transparency. I also get to see who looked.
Really?
Because in order to look, you have to log on with your ID card. So I know that, that reporter, there he is again, looking to see.
Got it.
And where this really comes in with privacy and becomes crucial is that, and I say this especially for my fellow Europeans who are especially in Deutschland, very concerned about these things, is that when Michael Schumacher, the famous Formula One driver, had a horrible skiing accident about 8-9 years ago.
That's right.
Within hours, his x-rays and medical records were splashed all across the newspapers of Europe. If that happened in Estonia, which would be very unlikely, we'd immediately know who did it because we log every interaction, every single interaction on the system is there. I can see immediately that. So if I had a big accident, there'd probably be 5-6 doctors who are authorized to look at my medical records. Well, I know immediately it's one of those guys who did it, and then we can investigate further. Whereas if you have a undigital system, you can just go over to the file cabinet, pull it out, find Michael Schumacher, go make a photocopy, put it back in. No one knows where it came from. And so this is key to making this work, is that whoever is looking at you. That's
mutual transparency. Yeah.
Right.
If I may ask, and just staying on topic with Estonia, do you find in the current processes and systems in place, was there ever a need to actually regulate the technology? Because often there's this grand debate about, no, you should not regulate the technology. You should regulate the behaviors or the outcomes that relate to, let's say, securities laws or to, money transfer, but not the actual technology itself. Was there ever a debate like that?
No, we have not. I mean, technology. No, we don't. There are requirements for security of software, but hardware, it's not a big deal.
Okay, got it. And I am taking a couple questions from the question log, so I appreciate those who are starting to drop in questions here. There's one around, would a government trust other digital identities from non-government groups? Would there ever be a scenario where that could be possible? So you have your mandatory identity layer, but let's say perhaps there is another group out there, let's say it's a social media network that also has an identity layer. How could those two things interoperate or work?
Well, first of all, everyone has an individual identity. You do not have a group identity here. So when you enter the Estonian system, you enter as you and nothing else. Now, we've been thinking about this. The problem is that, since you're allowed all kinds of legal operations using this, I don't know of any social network that really is willing to stand up legally for any kind of interaction. Maybe that'll change, but right now, I don't see that happening. Much more interesting for me is self-sovereign identity and how we deal with that in the future, and how you get recognition of self-sovereign identity for legal transactions. It's not there yet. It's done. It can be done. It's done at in the private sector level, but it is not done at the legal level, to my knowledge.
I am actually a proud holder of a Estonian E Residency card. Had that for free for a few years. I know a lot of entrepreneurs from around the world have applied and have also access and now benefits to the Estonian E Residency system. Do you mind talking a little bit about the E Residency program and what that is and how you've seen it evolve over the last number of years?
Okay, I'll start from way back. Basically, when you digitize, you realize that there are so many things that have always been done a certain way because of the limitations of technology. And I think I'll get to e-residency, but a far more crucial one is that bureaucracy has always worked since it was invented in China, Egypt, Mesopotamia, whenever. It's worked as a serial process because you have one piece of paper, papyrus, vellum, whatever you're writing on, and the bureaucrat does something, and then it goes to the next office, and then from that office it goes to and that's a serial process. So we realize in digitization that in fact it can be a parallel process, and everything gets done at once. And say you want to establish a business, you check, identity, bankruptcies. Have you been convicted of a crime? Have you paid your alimony? Well, that stuff, right?
Right.
It doesn't go one office to the next office. It goes out all at once. So you save lives. So this is this reconceptualization of governance. Now, when it comes to e-residency, if you think it through, you think that there are a number of things that have always been tied to the place you live in, the country you live in, because that's just the way they develop. But, some things are. If you pay taxes in a country, you get the services. That's obvious. But on the other hand, the right to establish a business or to open a bank account, Yeah, why not? I mean, why should that be tied to the country that you are living in as a resident or citizen? And so we did this thing. We said, well, let's see what happens. But what's happened is that there's a broad market for doing this. For one, you have countries that have where it's difficult to do international trade or transactions. So I know there's a whole, I mean, Ukraine, maybe things have gotten better, but a couple of years ago, PayPal didn't service Ukraine. But they're great, great software companies in Ukraine. The question is, how do you pay? How do you get your money, right? So you open up, you get a residency card, you establish the business in Estonia legally, and you have a bank account. And so when you buy this software product, you transfer money to a bank account in Estonia. Now with Brexit, here's another case. I mean, look, all the big British companies, it doesn't really matter. They have their brick and mortar offices in Frankfurt, Paris, Brussels, wherever. But if you're a small online business, say, and you know, you're not gonna open an office in Paris, Brussels, or anything else, but you do a lot of business in the EU, and you want to take advantage of the single market regulation of the EU. And so what are you going to do? Well, you go and you establish yourself as an EU company in Estonia digitally, right? So that was the idea. So we see, I mean, all around the world, companies that want to establish themselves inside the EU to take advantage of EU, the single market, which is the most important thing. So no tariffs and all that stuff. You do it in Estonia. Now I read that Lithuania is copying us. So about 5 years later, they're doing it too. So I mean, it's just there's nothing outrageous about it. It's when you realize that there are things you no longer have. You're no longer limited by a paper world in governance. Now, in the private sector, people figured this out decades and decades ago. In governance,
Right.
they're slow. They're slow. I mean, an example
A
of
mindset shift. Yeah.
I mean, one of the advantages that we have in governance, just because I was talking about parallel processing, is that
Right.
we have a once only regulation. And what that means is that in any interaction in which you identify yourself with your ID, you never have to add any information that already exists in the system. I never have to write my address, my birthday, my telephone number. I don't do any of that, all of that. When did I last register my car? Yeah, it's all there. I don't have to put anything in anywhere. Only new information. And the government can't ask me for any information that it has already because it's a waste of my time. Whereas in the US, I don't know, I'd say about 3 times a week, I was writing out my physical address, my email address, my telephone number. It's
extraordinary how much of redundancy there is in everything we do to day-to-day life. Yeah, I agree with you, in the US in particular.
Well, most of Europe, to be frank. Believe me, Germany's no different.
Well, there you go. A lot of room for improvement. I'm going to take some questions, if it's all right with you, President Ilves, because people are certainly interested in a number of topics that you've already covered, but I think they'd like you to go into a bit more detail. So, by the way, I want to thank Ben for the previous question on decentralized and non-government and identity question. Sorry, we only got to part 1, but I do need to move on to a couple other questions. We'll see if we can circle back. But Cornelius is asking about your discussion point around digitizing schools in Estonia, and what lessons can countries learn from the journey, especially now that we're in a we're going into a post-COVID world. How could school systems that weren't previously digitized really think about having that sort of resiliency and at least having the solutions around online learning, and also marrying that with sort of, systems.
Well, I
It's
mean,
a
the
huge shift.
idea for us was to get, I mean, my idea was to get kids behind computers and playing with them. I mean, that was the idea. And in the hope that some of them would be enjoying it enough to want to start coding. So, I mean, the fact that you have computer classes and computers in your school that are connected was extremely novel in 1997, 98. Now it's kind of like, yeah, no big deal. But as a result of that, we actually developed, we have a number of programs for just for schooling. I mean, sort of online education programs. Where the real effect came in was not from actually the schooling, but it was, I mean, I said by 98, every school was online. And then we had this program, some journalists called it the tiger leap. So we'd leap like a tiger from, into the future. That was good because, I mean, I didn't have a name for it. I mean, I just proposed the idea. But 20 years later, or 18 years later, I mean, I was, toward the end of my term, I always visited startups. I would, well, how'd you get into this thing? Why did you do this tech company here? And, people like 80% of the time said, oh, I was a kid in your program like 15 years ago. So it had that effect that people got into tech. They thought about things. They were innovative. I mean, this is where I think that's the biggest effect that came out of this, is that the people who were intrigued by computers, by coding, by digital things, got into it earlier than they do elsewhere. Which was also my experience when I was, 50 years ago, learned to code. I mean, I said, oh, this is really cool. I like this. But in terms of curricula, well, I mean, it's, the curricula is digitized. It's hard for me to say. I mean, I talked to my younger daughter. She's not thrilled with the fact that it's so much more efficient. Kind of like, you didn't hand in your thing today. What happened? Or where were you? So, it's, it varies.
I think for those governments and countries that are looking to start their journey, Estonia is certainly a good example to borrow from experiences and the journey there. There's a question from Matt regarding, again, when you started off trying to convince people to go digital, did you actually have any government departments in particular that were more resistant than others? How did you handle that if that was the case? For example, like were the tax department or, I don't know, traditionally very sort of paper-based departments more resistant than others?
No, tax departments love digitization. I mean, when people ask me for advice, and one of the things I say is that think about services for people, because otherwise it's going to be only the revenue service that cares about this.
Okay.
Because they love it. They love it. So, but on the other hand, the digitization of taxation in Estonia so dramatically increased compliance that we were able to decrease the tax rate.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because you don't have to tax people as much if you get the money, because they're not cheating you anymore.
Now that is a case to be made, yes.
Well, I'll give you an example. I don't know if there are any Latvians on board today, but 2015, the year 2015, our southern neighbor, Latvia, it's 70% larger in population. And the economies are more or less equivalent, but we generated with a population slightly over half of Latvia, and basically very similar tax system and GDP per capita, 15% more revenue. I mean, how's that possible? It's a country that is, and then if you look at and we did this with, in our country we have We had 1,300 people working for the tax administration. They had at the time 5,400. So 4 times as many people working to collect fewer taxes from in a larger country.
Right.
And the difference is, of course, is the degree of digitization of taxes. So, I mean, Latvia is actually very digitized and doing well and doing kind of stuff that is very interesting. But at that time, they had not been. I mean, you had this slice for one year where you could weigh the benefits of, weigh what does a digitized tax system look like and what an undigitized tax system looks like. Opposition actually came from teachers.
Really?
Because that was completely understandable, because here was something that teachers didn't know, especially in the 90s, right? I mean, no one's seen a computer. Suddenly you have these computers come in, and then you have all these kids who are going to figure it out very quickly, and you're going to look like a dumb teacher. So that was where the opposition came. And I'd say for about the first year, the teachers union's weekly newspaper always devoted at least one article saying how stupid I am and what a threat I am to the national culture.
Oh dear. Okay.
But on the organization of this, what I do recommend to everyone is do not have a ministry of digitization. I mean, you can have people to deal with it, but see, what happens is, in the way government works, is that if you have a ministry or a department of digitization, first of all, all the other departments or ministries will say, like you want a ministry of, or Department of Agriculture, you want to digitize. It's not my problem. It's the digitization department's problem. On the other hand, if you are the minister or the secretary of digitization, you come in and say, Minister of Agriculture, you really got to do this. And you say, who are you?
Right.
Go away. So having a ministry of digitization generally has not been effective. Where it has to be is at the top. I mean, not that the president or the prime minister himself has to do it, but the authority must reside under the executive, so that when you are the executive, so that whoever is doing the digitization will say, the president or the prime minister wants this done. And then,
right.
I mean, it must be, in this sense, a primus inter pares. I mean, sort of the first among equals. And then you can be effective. But I've seen this in so many countries where you have a ministry of digitization. It just doesn't go anywhere because everyone else says go away.
Right. No,
that has to do with governance. There's nothing to do with digitization. It has to do with governance. But if you're dealing with a process that affects all of governance, then it has to be done from the top and not from a corner.
Yep. That's very valuable information and advice. I think for those out there who are talking to governments, pay heed to that. We're going to switch gears slightly with a question from Michael about your thoughts, if you have any, on the central bank digital currency craze that's been going on. Even though CBDC as a concept has been around for years, do you have any views on what we're seeing in the markets now between governments saying they're launching their own CBDC versus the Libras and the various other kinds of stablecoins that may be developed over the next few years?
I have no sophisticated thoughts on this. I do know that the Estonian central bank is looking seriously at it. I've heard that the Central Bank of England is looking seriously at it. What looking seriously means, however, everybody's guess. But at least I know I know some of the people who are being looked at seriously as sort of possible ways of doing this.
Right.
And they're serious. So, I mean, I think it'll happen. I think it will happen. But I'm not sure about sort of cryptocurrencies being used, and certainly the abuse of cryptocurrencies for money laundering and illegal activities and extortion and all these things are things that people don't like. We don't like it from the government side. Clearly, it's illegal. Libra seems to be dead in the water right now, but that's probably for other reasons. Maybe it'll go there. I personally would not use Libra, but that's me.
So I think they're still on track to launch, at least release version 1.0 in 2020. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But, you know, it certainly has gotten the attention of a number of governments, and even the US has got their own digital dollar initiative that's being discussed. Again, under discussion, and I agree with you, it'll probably take years before at least some of the substantial countries will be able to release it out to the wild for the public to actually utilize. There are a lot of questions here related to the US. I'm going to go back to the US and your thoughts on it. Just also, you've spent time, you've grown up, and also you've recently spent time in the US. I think there's a perception from those inside the US and outside that the US seems very far behind digital transformation. This is an anonymous question. Many seem to think that our systems function, quote unquote,
You're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. There are questions around the government does not appear keen to embrace new technologies. Do you think, how is the US doing? And obviously, what do you think the US needs to do in order to embrace a digital society? Now, you already mentioned identity. We got you there. Is there anything else the US could do?
Yeah, how much time we have?
I know.
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, I mean, it is. It's a slightly more complex problem that for larger countries, not because there are more people, because this is all scalable. But once you get to a certain size, you end up with federal states. So Germany, Canada, the United States, Australia, Brazil, they all are federal states. And what that means is that you have different levels of competence. So in the United States, you know, driver's licenses, banking regulations, all of that is done at the state level, not at a national level. So, I mean, which is more complex than in unitary states, which is most of Europe, except for Germany, is unitary states, meaning that the same people who deal with regulating banking, I mean, they're doing it at the national level, whereas the US is done at the state level, and your driver's licenses. So that's an added glitch. Then you have the problem of ignorance. I mean, if the chairman of the finance committee of the US Senate asked Mark Zuckerberg, how do you make your money? We have a problem, you know? I mean, this is a problem that has nothing to do with Mark Zuckerberg, yeah. Although there may be many problems associated with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. This is a problem of governance. If you don't get it, if you don't get tech. I mean, in the United States, you have John Warner and Ted Lieu. They have tech backgrounds. They're smart. They get it. But, you know, then you have people who have no clue whatsoever. And so you need to have a certain level of at least passing knowledge of what technology is about. And I'm especially because I think it's criminal almost. I mean, not that the governments don't know this stuff, because we live. This is as profound a change in the way life is run as what happened after the printing press. I mean, which changed everything, because all of a sudden you had people who could read books, then you had books, and then you had the 30 Years' War because people were reading the wrong books. But the point is that if you go back even 20 years ago, well, I remember this 1997, 36% of Americans had a computer at home, which was a wildly large statistic then. And then you think that we have these things here, right? I mean,
right in your pocket.
Right. Everything is, you can do everything online commercially, at least in the United States. And at the same time, no one understands how it works. And you don't really, I mean, the business model is, of course, isn't even understood by most because basically it's all running your data. I mean, we do not have in the government enough people who understand technology in order, and among lawmakers and policymakers, people who understand it.
Yep.
And so, I mean, it's a conceptual hurdle that needs to be overcome so that people can think intelligently about this. And I think that today already we're in an era where the traditional 19th century concepts of left and right and ownership, I mean, it's obviously still there, but I think the whole concept, I mean, what do we do in this data-based world? And
absolutely.
I mean, what is technology policy? What is the role of the government? I mean, all of these things have to, I mean, you need to have a worldview. People need to not only have a Adam Smith or Karl Marx derived worldview, you actually need one that's either derived from Jaron Lanier or from Timothy Wu, I don't know, Yevgeny Morozov, whatever. I mean, the point is that the policy debates have rarely ever gone beyond a particular mess. I mean, okay, Equifax, Cambridge Analytica. I mean, they spawn discussions on things, but there's no real thought out sort of range of ideas more broadly that we have to work toward. And we do live in a completely transformed society. And in 2000, there was no Facebook, there were no smartphones. Hacking was something that was done to the DOD, but that's about it. And computer crime existed already in the 1970s, but it was minuscule, minor.
I think I completely agree with you that we need politicians and those going into politics to understand that technology in our digital society that's evolving is needs to be actually required learning and required skill set to navigate into the future. And frankly, the US, I agree with you, the US is at a complete deficit when it comes to having qualified, knowledgeable politicians, at least in the current state that we're in.
I would suggest a follow-up on that question is that what should the US do? I mean, one thing the US does have is that, I mean, as a car-obsessed culture, most people have driver's licenses. Or let's say the percentage of people who don't have driver's licenses, you can deal with them and give them something. But all you need to do is put a chip on a driver's license. Then everybody has an ID, because anyway, your driver's license is your identity document in the United States. Because very few people have passports, or a very small percentage of them. Your driver's license, and so you want an identity. All the state needs to do is, I mean, the starting level. I mean, it has to do, each state has to do a lot. But you start off by putting a chip on your driver's license. And then everyone from day one on, when they get a driver's license, they get one with a chip. And then you have an identity. And then once you have the identity, you can build the system. And to make these interoperable is also easy. And one example of how difficult it is to digitize, but how even simple things, is that we have in my country since 2007, we have digital prescriptions. So I mean, the doctor he just puts my prescription in a computer, and I can go to any pharmacy in the country, stick in my card, and I ID myself, and I get my prescription. Now, Finland did the same thing in their country. They're right across the bay from us, well, Gulf. So we get about 8 million Finns visiting a year. Now, there only are 5 million Finns, so I mean, we got a lot of visits.
That's a very interesting statistic there. Yes.
But so, so like 10 years ago, I went to the president of Finland and I said, Sauli, why don't we do, look, you have digital prescriptions and you use our data exchange layer, because that's what Finland did. They took over ours because it's open source, non-proprietary. And it's called X Road, and you can watch a wonderful little video, 3.5 minutes, called X-Road longer version on YouTube. And you can go to NIIS.org, because we formed a nonprofit consortium to develop this
excellent
open source software. NIIS.org, and you can go there. But anyway, so we share the same system, and we have the same software. And so I said, well, so why don't we do it with all these people visiting from Finland? And we have a lot of Estonians in Finland too, but not nearly as many go there. But so if a Finn comes to Estonia and he has a good time and or something, or loses medicine, he can call his doctor at home. His doctor at home puts in the prescription that he needs, and then he goes with his Finnish ID card and slips it into the machine at the pharmacy and IDs himself. He gets his medicine there. Now, I mean, the tech behind this would have taken a week, but it took almost 10 years because of all of the regulation. You have to avoid arbitrage, because one country subsidizes one medicine for one age group to a certain degree, and the other country gives, different kinds of pensioners a different drug, but it does the same thing. All of that stuff, it's a mess. It has to be worked out. On the other hand, none of it is digital. None of that problem set is digital. The problems are all in the analog world. And what I would like to see is that this becomes completely transnational, so that all across Europe, if I go to Greece and I get sick, not only can I get my medicine, but I'll go to the doctor in Greece, and believe me, he ain't never gonna know Estonian. And I authorize him with my ID to look at my medical records in Estonia. Right. It'll come up before him, except it'll already be translated into Greek. So he can say, oh, okay, you had this car accident, not here, you had this, that. All of this is technologically doable today. Yes. Today, it's not at all impossible, but it's lack of political will. I mean, you can make life so much easier using this technology, yet we don't have the political will to do it, and a lot of Luddites around, and people don't know anything about that.
I like the world scenario you just laid out there for all of us. That would be amazing if that were in place. And I completely agree with you. Technologically, a lot of this stuff is available. It's the mindset shift and the will to make it happen, which is often the biggest hurdles. Believe it or not, we're already at the hour, and we have many more questions here. Just to thank you so much, President Ilves, I want to end with one note here. There is a gentleman who's leading efforts in South Carolina, and you've now sparked a light bulb moment for him, Dennis, regarding the taxation example you've given. And I think he'll be taking that to the South Carolinians. We'll see what happens there. But thank you so much.
If someone's interested, you can get me on LinkedIn.
I will make sure you and Dennis are connected. Absolutely. And I want to thank you. Do you have any final parting words for the community as they're listening to you? Thank you so much.
Well, in general, I'd just say push your politicians, and more specifically, think about the fact that permissioned closed systems for blockchain are not everyone's wanting to make money on coins, but the point is that trust is the issue, and trust is what we need in government, and we need in the public sector, and those things generally obviously are going to be permissions. I would think about much more about that end of blockchain.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand this back over to Sophia. I do apologize to all the great participants who asked questions we didn't get to today. We could spend easily a few more hours with President Ilves, but we do need to end it here. So thank you. Over to you, Sophia. And thank you, President Ilves.
Yes, thank you, President Ilves, for joining us today. We will be sure to share a link to the video recording for those who may not have been able to join us live today. And we will circulate via email a link to the recording, as well as President Ilves' LinkedIn and Twitter, so you can contact him. We also hope you'll be able to join us next week at the same time for a webinar with Elaine Sun, Group Compliance Director at Hobie, and for the GBBC and Ocean Elders webinar next Friday with Bernard Kowach, head of the UN World Food Program Innovation Accelerator on investing in tech solutions to end global hunger. A link to these webinars will be circulated along with the webinar recording. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and particularly to President Ilves for making the time. Till soon. Thank you.
Bye.